In this video, I want to talk about some of the unique things you might find when you're working on your early wheel horse 3-speed transmission. Because, well, they're not all the same. I did a multi-part video series on rebuilding one of these 3-piece transmissions in 2017. If you're interested in that, you can find those videos on my channel. I'll put a link to some of them in the description. This is the 4 different types of side plates I've come across. This would be the left side of the transmission. The 2 I have on the left here are the 1958 and 59 style. You can tell by where the brake band anchor plate is. This is where the brake band goes on this model. The difference between these 2 side plates is the bearing type and size. There's a roller bearing that has a smaller outside diameter, and there's a ball bearing that's thinner and has a bigger outside diameter. The shaft is the same diameter for both types of bearings, but these bearings are different thickness, so the shaft length had to change. This end of the gear is the shaft that goes through the bearings I'm talking about. If I measure this right here, this part of the gear is about 4.5 inches long to where the shaft starts. This one over here measures about 4 5/8 inches, a little bit longer. So this one on the left was used with the thinner ball bearing, where that one on the right had to be a little shorter to use the wider roller bearing. The 2 on the right are the 1960 and 61 style. You can tell by where the brake band anchor plate is. This one's rotated up some, so the linkage comes in from a different direction, because they changed the clutch configuration in 1960. Once again, you have a roller bearing style and a ball bearing style in the side plate. So what happened here is the ball bearings are the older style. They were used on all 5003 transmissions, like what I have on the left side here, and used on the early 5010 transmissions, which is what I have on the right side. The late 5010 transmissions and the replacement transmission of both types used the needle bearings. Another interesting note, this 58-59 style side plate on the bottom has a hole for the secondary hitch that was part of the 1960 style setup. It's this one in the upper corner. I think that's because this is a replacement transmission. With the hole there, this side plate could be used on both types before the brake band anchor plate was welded on. Then they only had to stock one side plate to make both types. Here's a 1960 tractor with the mower deck mounting like I'm talking about. The mower deck was mounted on some bars that would pivot to allow the deck to move vertically. On the back, here's the bar that pulls the mower deck towards the rear, and it's mounted to the standard lift hitch. So the lift hitch pulling back on the mower deck is what raises it. The problem with this design is the hitch is not available for anything else when the mower deck is mounted. And I assume that's why they added the additional hitch. Here's some of the secondary hitches they used in 1960. This first one has a large hole in it. Somebody might have modified that. But notice there's no stop blocks welded to these mounting arms, so that might be an early style. I think this one's the most common original style. It has the smaller hole in the hitch, and this little stop block welded on one arm to limit the travel. Here's another one just like it. This one has a stop block on each side, and they're both thicker than what you normally see. I don't know if that's original. Here's another one with the longer stop on one arm. I don't know if that's original. It has the factory looking stop block on this other side. This one's got a big nut welded in there. That's probably not original. Here's some different styles of the lower hitch. I think this one on the left is the earliest of the three I have here. It has the squared off ends on the arm, and it has the narrow support bar on the bottom. I think those are the early ones because I have some of those that are twisted from the load. I think when they figured that out, they changed to this wider support bar on the bottom to make it stronger. Then the latest version has rounded ends on the arm, and it still has the wide support bar on the bottom. I know there's an earlier one. It's not in this group because they didn't have one on the shelf. Here's some pictures of that. I believe this is the earliest one because it's made of individual flat pieces. That would have been more time consuming to make, so they quickly switched to the bent top style like you normally see. Next, I want to talk about the numbers on the transmission case just to the right of the shifter. I heard that this was a date code, so I looked at some of my transmissions. Here's a G9-9. If the letter is the month, G is the 7th letter, and the 7th month is July. The first 9 is the day of the month, and the second 9 is the last digit of the year. So this G9-9 is July 9th, 1959. Before I show the next two in the video here, I want to throw in a picture. This is a tractor in storage, so the lighting's bad. But you can see the date code has a letter M. Well, that's the 13th letter in the alphabet, but there's only 12 months in a year. I think that's because they skipped the letter I, so it wouldn't be confused for a 1. So if I ever find an I, or anything above an M, then I would dispute the theory. I haven't found either of those things yet, which means so far I think it's possibly true. Now looking at these other two, here's an L24-9. So L is the 12th letter, but I is before L and you skipped I. So L would be the 11th month. That means this date is November 24th, 1959. Here's one that says J11-1. J is the 10th letter, but again I is before J, so you skipped I. So J would be the 9th month. That means this date is September 11th, 1961. I have one transmission that has no tag in the casting. It's just smooth across there. And I think that was an early transmission. Maybe before they thought it was useful to put a date there. Now here's one that's different. It has a percentage character in there. I don't know what that's about, but the date code D13 is there. There's a 1 after the percent sign, and this is a 1961 tractor, so the 1 could be valid. Another thing to notice is this tag is rotated 180 degrees from all the others. The shifter's on the right when you're reading the tag in this picture, where all the other pictures I showed, the shifter was on the left. This transmission tag is an oddball from the rest of them, but the date code theory still works. There's a few different types of gear sets that were used in these transmissions. The early style didn't work so well because there's not enough teeth on the gears. That leads to bad gear geometry, and they wear out too quickly. I have these sitting on this board here so they're positioned as they are in the transmission. This one on the left is the early style. It only has 8 teeth on this small gear. All of the teeth on this big gear have big lines gouged in them from the scraping going on because the gear teeth don't mesh properly. When they figured that out, this is what the new style looked like. Now the small gear has 11 teeth on it, and the big gear has more teeth to match. The teeth are better shaped, so they can do more sliding and less scraping. It's just better gear geometry. So can you put an updated set of gears in your transmission? If you have a needle bearing in your side plate, then your 11-tooth gear has to be the shorter style. It measures about 4.5 inches. If you have a ball bearing in your side plate, then your 11-tooth gear can be either length, but if you have the shorter gear, you have to add spacers on the shaft to make up the difference. Here's an example of the early style that's worn out even more. After a while, the chunks of metal start breaking off the teeth. These are worn to almost a triangle shape. Here's what the smaller gear looks like. Once you have metal chips grinding around in there, both gears take a beating. So could I use some worn out gears in my transmission? It's better to replace them if you can, but here's what happened to me. This RJ58's the first wheel horse I restored. I didn't have parts or know where to get them. My gear looked just about like this one here on the left. So I used a Dremel grinder with 1/8-inch grinder stones, and I deburred the corners and took off all the sharp edges. I didn't try to grind out all the grooves. You just want to get the sharp edges off so the gear teeth have a chance to slide instead of scrape. I put that together around 2001 and been riding it around at tractor shows since then. I'm a small guy and I don't pull anything with it, so it don't work very hard. You can tell if your tractor has those worn out gears in it if it makes a noise like this when you push it backward. It's quiet when you push it forward. But makes a knocking noise when you push it backward. The gear ratio changed slightly when they changed the number of teeth. On the older style, it was 8 teeth on the small gear to 31 teeth on the large gear. That comes out to a 3.875 to 1 ratio. On the newer style, It was 11 teeth on the small gear to 43 teeth on the large gear. That comes out to a 3.909 to 1 ratio. So the newer gear sets would turn the axle a tiny bit slower, probably not even noticeable. There's a newer style of replacement gear. The ring gear bolts onto the differential case instead of being cast as one piece. It has the 43 teeth like this one does. These matching gears remained unchanged. The bolt-on gear was shifted over a little from the cast-in gear, so it rode in a different place on this smaller gear. But the smaller gear is wide enough it didn't matter. I think the removable gear is a better design, because the gear can be made out of steel instead of cast iron. Towards the front of the transmission, there's a spline shaft with a couple of sliding gears. This is the second and third gear, and the bigger one is for first and reverse. The smallest one is the pinion gear. It fits on the splines too, but it's held in place with a snap ring. That's out of an earlier transmission, and this one's out of a later transmission. They both look about the same, but if you count the splines around here, there's 10 on the early set, and on the later set there's 11 splines. So none of these gears fit on the wrong shaft. This gear don't go on that shaft, and that gear don't go on this shaft. So there's 4 parts that have to go together there. If you replace one gear, it has to have the same number of splines. Or you could replace all 4 parts together. Well, I guess I'm done talking about transmissions for a bit. Hopefully this information's useful to somebody working on the early wheel horse transmission. Alright, that's it.